Wow, our audience is stunning here. Episode 86 of the Hauger History Podcast. Thanks for listening, everybody. Today we're diving in to Unit 2 of American History, the Constitution to the Civil War. And I'm joined by a number of students today. And what's your name,
Rose.
contestant number 1? Rose, thanks so much for joining us. And Rose is here to talk with us about the first section of the unit, which is everything leading up into the Constitution. So Shays Rebellion is where I want to start. Daniel Shays was a farmer. He was a former war veteran. And he wanted to just settle down with his family and raise money and just live his life, and he ran into some problems. You remember the kinds of problems that he was running into, Rose?
Land, dealing with the taxes, and he didn't really have much progress with people working and making money because of all the issues with the government not helping.
Absolutely, and he found, like many people who were farming at the time, that they were borrowing the land and working themselves into debt, right? Which was going to be a huge problem because when you can't pay your debt, they threw you in jail. And he was jailed multiple times. He leads a rebellion, and the rebellers were hanged. So rising tensions, and suddenly there's a problem that says we need a much stronger constitution. So the Constitution's often referred to, Rose, as a living document. Do you know why it's referred to as a living document or what that means?
It's referred to as a living document because it can be changed and it is able to adapt to new times and really just change. It's a very dynamic document.
Yeah, absolutely, and well said. So as we have new problems in the future, the Founding Fathers didn't know what problems we'd have, but they knew we were going to have problems. So they created this document that could be amended and changed over time. That's perfect. The preamble of the Constitution, as it started out when they created this newer document, starts out with setting the goals for the government. And who is the father of the Constitution, Rose?
That would be James Madison.
Oh, that is correct, and the audience goes wild. So I won't say that again. All right, that was awesome. Which group pushed? There was this debate when this debate happened between Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and who was pushing for this Bill of Rights if they were going to ratify this Constitution?
That would be the Anti-Federalists.
That's very true, and it's the reason why I always stress that differences of opinion can be important. If they hadn't argued, if they hadn't pushed for free rights, maybe we wouldn't have the Bill of Rights today in those first 10 amendments, and imagine what kind of country we would be without that. So I don't think we'd be closer to our ideals without that. Which of the following, if I was to ask you on an exam, and for those of you studying, you're probably looking at what is and what isn't important about the Bill of Rights when it's initially passed. If it was privacy protection, free speech, right to trial, we know those three things are all included. So it didn't include all people, and that's the problem. It's like every time we put down these ideals on paper or this vision of the country on paper, we weren't including women. We weren't including African Americans or slaves or other minority groups. So that was a huge problem of the time. And so the Supremacy Clause was also created in the Constitution that says states have their own laws, but federal constitution will always be supreme, the supreme law of the land. And what is the term, Rose, for powers that the states and government share together?
Concurrent.
That is excellent. You are like a student of few words, but when they're all right, how can we argue? The audience is quietly going wild? See, that was kind of what I was expecting that first time. That was good. And then the authority to make all laws necessary and proper for the nation. What term is that, Rose?
Elastic.
Oh, wow. You are just so good at that. Let's give everyone, Rose, a round of applause. And we thank you for playing today. We leave you with a Post-it as your parting gift. We're not sponsored by Post-it. I don't even know if these aren't even real Post-its. How, in the world of copyrights and patents and whatnot, how can this company, which will be named Brandless, do the exact same thing and not, Post-its, I feel for you. And move on in. So who's joining me now for the next section of this review? It's like we have a whole panel today. Who's joining me?
I'm Zach. My name's not fake enough.
Let's just appreciate that for a minute as we move on. All right, so Zach's going to join us. I'll use air quotes. Zach is going to join us for the next section, legislative, executive, judicial branches. Ooh, school bus is showing up. It's like we're at a school. This is cool. I want you to tell me for each statement that I read which branch of government is involved, okay? You can do your best. We make mistakes. I make mistakes. This thing is always backwards until I show the camera, and so there's mistakes being made all around us constantly. But we learn from those mistakes, don't we, audience? Everyone else can also be in the audience, too, when you're, not a contestant. Yeah! Oh, fired up in here. Okay. Ready, Zach?
Yes.
Okay, get right up in here, too, when you can. All right. Who appoints federal judges? This is happening right now in 2018.
The executive branch.
That's right. The president appoints them. Just a bonus question. Who has to confirm them?
branch.
That would be the legislative branch, correct. That's okay. Who can declare presidential acts unconstitutional? I think this is where you were going.
That's the judicial branch.
Yeah, they determine whether laws are constitutional or not. Who, if the president were to go to impeachment, historically, would be the branch that would bring and press these charges against him?
That would be the legislative branch.
Very good. You're on a roll now. Which branch creates the laws?
That would be the legislative branch again.
Very good. Which branch enforces the laws?
That's the executive branch.
Killing it. Which one has the president as its leader?
That would be the executive branch.
You got it. See, you're nailing these. Which one has the chief justice as its head of its department?
That's the judicial branch.
Very good, very good. Which person or which branch has the power to veto laws, to say the laws from the Congress, no, we're not going for it?
That's the executive branch.
Beautiful. Which one approves federal judges?
That's the legislative branch.
Very good. They have to confirm them. And then which branch is appointed for life?
That's the judicial branch.
You did so excellent. Audience, give Zach a round of applause. All right, Zach. Well, we thank you so much for playing today. We have a beautiful parting gift for you. Off-branded hand sanitizer. It's a beautiful thing. I'll have some right now. You can have some too. Well, no, we can't afford brand names here on the Hauger History Podcast. Not for until we get some listenership and who what else? That could be on a Hauger History Podcast. Who what else T-shirts coming out soon. Let's do that. That would be fun. Oh boy. All right, let's get our next contestant in. All right, so audience, we're just doing a great job. Let's pump it up one more time. It's actually cool to have people here. This is awesome. Okay, so I'm here with Hollywood. Hollywood, how are you doing today?
Good. Thank you for having me here. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I feel like I'm in the presence of a celebrity. This is like a big deal right now. We're going to talk about the time period after the Constitution was created for the next several questions. Check your notes at home as we go. So at the time of the U.S. Constitution, what were most people doing as their jobs, Hollywood?
Well, the majority, as I can remember, which was the center of the U.S. economy, was farming, and because farmers were growing cash crops and it provided most food for most families.
Very good, yeah. And something like 3 out of 4 farmers, as we estimate, were the American population at that time. The gain of each state after the colonies began when they started gaining land, because we start moving west, picking up territories left and right. We're like taking whatever we can get. But every time we pick up an area, we have to have like a very serious, tense debate. And what's that debate over in most of these states?
The main debate, and something that was a sensitive topic as well, between people who thought of it morally and ethically, it was whether the right of holding and freeing slaves.
That's right. So like what kind of state was this going to be, which territory, and what was that important balance that we kept having these arguments about, these past legislations. So absolutely, well said. And some of these areas and territories, it wasn't mandated by the government. It was left up to the popular vote, the vote of the people, to decide in those territories if we're going to have slavery or not. And what was the term for that?
It was popular sovereignty.
Yeah, very well said, too. I know it's like a weirdly spelled word. That's not the way I would have spelled it. Good thing it's not a spelling bee in here. Anyways, we're moving right along. And so the North in 1850 supported this compromise of 1850. And it did something. It brought in a state into the Union. Hollywood knows this one. And what state was that?
California.
Yeah. It made California a free state, but it also passed something else at the same time, something that would return runaways and was supposed to placate and satisfy the South. And what was that?
It was the Fugitive Slave Act.
Yeah, that was the Fugitive Slave Act. So it was this compromise that on paper was supposed to keep tensions from running higher, but it actually kind of did the opposite, right? Because we had runaways, we had bounties, accusations, warrants, and people just basically, as far as the African-American population, didn't have any rights and didn't have anywhere to turn. And now people were by law ordered to return them if they were accused or even suspected of running away, which made things extremely difficult. As we talked about in class, like it takes a conversation to get issues more widely known, right, Hollywood? We got to talk about things, in order to fix things. So there was an author and a book that really changed the course of the awareness of slavery, and what was that?
It was Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. I think I pronounced that right.
Yeah, you absolutely did. Why do you think, just a question for you, why do you think people need to be aware of issues in order to do something about that? And why did this book have such an impact? Sold 1 million copies in a year. Why do you think that this kind of affected people and made people want change?
I think that it caused people to want change because it made them be aware of the issue instead of just the surface of it and what they didn't know, that they became fully informed. And also, I think by writing this book and at this time, the way that it was able to sell and it was able to spread across the country, it really helped people become aware of the issue and work to improve it.
Well said. Hollywood, everybody. Give them some love. That's good stuff. All right. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much.
Oh, we appreciate it. We hope you come back again.
Definitely.
All right. We thank Hollywood so much. We know he's into cash and cash money, so we're going to give him $100 Hauger dollars to take home with him today. And I don't know why that seems to be worth more than the other prices until you figure out that it's actually worthless. So we're all even here. Everyone's earning about a penny of cash money, and we're going to move on to Valerie. Valerie, say good morning.
Good morning.
Nice, pleasant voice. We're on a great path here with the largest Hauger History Podcast we've ever done. This is fantastic. So let's talk about the country as we move forward. Slavery, tensions are high, territory is expanding, business is starting to boom. But we have this Supreme Court case about Dred Scott, who's in free territory, believes he's free, appeals to the Supreme Court. And what was the significance of the outcome, the conclusion? What did the court determine that Dred Scott had at the result of the Supreme Court case?
That he had no rights.
How did that set back the entire country as far as like progress? If you say that African Americans have no rights.
Because it's just making them less than a human, and they were hoping to get more closer to that and being equal, but they're now getting further than that.
And that's unfortunate. I think a lot of people were thinking this might be a moment, a turning point towards the positive, but in fact it wasn't, and it was a sign that we were a little bit in a dead end that was going to take a long time to get out of. Well said, very well said. What's the term that we used for like the expansion from sea to shining sea? They didn't really use it at the time, but what do we talk about when Americans are moving all the way west? What's the term for that?
Manifest destiny.
Yeah, that's good. So what kind of like positives and negatives were there about Manifest Destiny? Do you remember?
You were able to get a lot of like land and stuff, and they said there was more opportunity, but there was nowhere to really like be and actually like you got to build everything from scratch, and there's no like food there already, but they're like animals.
Yeah, well said, Valerie. I mean, there's a lot of difficulties. There's resources on the plus side. There's chances to get wealthy and make a life for yourself. But there's also going to be conflict along the way, difficulties. You have to set everything up yourself. One of the things we set up was the mail system, getting from Missouri to San Francisco in 10 days. What was the name of that early mail system?
Pony Express.
Do you like ponies?
Yes.
They're nice. You know what, though? You shouldn't ever make fun of them if their voice is, a little scratchy because they're just a little hoarse. And we're moving on from that. When we talked about trying to motivate people to move west, there was oftentimes these like really beautiful pictures and portraits and almost propaganda to show how beautiful Oregon and California was. Why did they do stuff like that? What was the goal of that?
They were trying to motivate travelers to colonize in that area.
Yeah. Do you think that would have been effective at the time?
Yeah.
I think so too, especially I think people were more gullible then. We didn't have like media filters, we didn't have Twitter, we didn't have people posting their cheeseburgers every time they went out to eat. So I think it was easier to persuade people. Plus, if your life wasn't that great, this was a chance to make it better. So I think absolutely. Then just two more topics to cover. We got gold in 1849, Sutter's Mill, dollar bills, y'all. And one of the things that people often think was that mining was free, but there was taxation and costs associated with that. So not everybody got rich. The people, and here's like what we were talking about earlier, people got rich early, then the news would spread back east like, oh my gosh, I've made so much money. Valerie is just like soaking in gold. But by the time they got there, the gold was done, and the best way to make money was to sell supplies to people who were in the area. So Sutter's Mill was also a way that some early miners got rich, but discrimination was a huge problem, and merchants were charging like modern day prices for eggs and supplies, and very few people at the end of that actually made any money. The last thing I want to ask you, Valerie, is how did this Republican Party split from the Whigs in 1854? What was the main goal of that party at the time?
To stop slavery in the West.
And that was significant, right? Now we had a huge group that was dedicated to doing that. 6 years later, we're going to have Abraham Lincoln, and the South is going to split apart. So we're in the middle of a really tense time in history. I thank you for being here with us. Valerie, I thank you for being here with us.
Thank you.
I'm going to give you my special pointer that you can borrow for up to an hour for any PowerPoints that you need.
Yay.
Again, off-brand. I'm noticing how cheap I am as the show goes on. I'm feeling more and more sad. But you shouldn't be, because now you know American History Unit 2. Thanks for listening. We hope you all like and
subscribe.
I didn't prep anybody for that, so I understand that no one knew what to say. But we thank you for listening. We'll see you on the next edition, and thanks, everybody. Class dismissed.